This is the Open Source Defense Podcast, and we're talking with Doug Ritter, founder of Knife Rights. If you like the conversation, like the podcast, subscribe to it, and a reminder to subscribe to Open Source Defense on Substack, X, Instagram, and a reminder that we run Open Source Defense Capital, which invests in civilian defense startups. So if you're a founder in that space, reach out. Now here's our conversation with Doug. There are a lot of single issue advocacy groups out there. And I think when you think about ones that have actually moved the needle on the thing that, is written on their door, there aren't a ton. And Knife Rights, I would say, is at the top of the list. I think Knife Rights have been a kind of underappreciated success over the past 20 years. So maybe Doug, just start off running us through. The group's been around 20 years. What have you done in that time? For someone who has not, heard about it, what has happened since you started Knife Rights?
I think the most essential thing that we have accomplished in the 20 years that we've been in existence and the 16 years that we have been effectively advocating for knife owners and the knife community is that we have 58 victories, either repealing knife bans in 30 odd states or adding protection for knife owners. This has changed the landscape, particularly in the case of switchblades and dirks, daggers, stilettos, and not just in red states, but in blue states as well. We've been successful in the legislature, often with bipartisan support, which is extraordinary given that we are a Second Amendment organization. And we've been successful, pretty successful in the courts. And that is becoming more important as we have moved from the low-hanging fruit to the more difficult blue states, where the only way we're going to accomplish anything is in the courts. I mean, we've taken on New York City, we've taken on Illinois, we've moved the needle tremendously for knife owners in this country. When I first started Knife Rights, I was told that we would never repeal a switchblade ban or a dagger ban or a length limit. That was crazy for me to even consider that. And now we look back on, I think we can, as you point out, one of the most successful advocacy organizations in the Second Amendment community.
Well, maybe let's just dive into that. And I lived in New York City for 13 years, carried a pocket knife and tried to figure out how to do that legally in New York. And it's easier said than done. For someone who doesn't know about this stuff, maybe walk us through what was or is in some places the lay of the land in terms of what are knife laws that people might need to think about or that might impact people who own a knife, carry a knife, and then what do some of your successes look like in terms of what the law looks like after you make a legislative change?
So the first thing I would mention is that we have an app for this. It's called the Legal Blade, and it lists all the knife laws of all the 50 states and the District of Columbia. What knives are legal, what knives are legal to carry, what knives can be carried concealed, and what you can't, as well as providing links where you can find the laws for particular cities or counties and that sort of thing. The difficulty with knife laws is they are much more complicated than firearms laws. We have firearms law preemption in almost all the states. We have passed knife law preemption in 13 states so far. So in many states, when you cross a city line or a county line, the knife laws change. So the knife that's in your pocket on one side of the city line is illegal on the other side of the city line. So it gets a little complicated. And one of the things I like to remind people of is it's never a problem until it's a problem. So with rare exception, we don't have law enforcement walking or driving along looking for knives to arrest people on. They're usually ancillary to getting their attention in some other manner, whether it's a traffic stop or you get in trouble or something like that. And then all of a sudden you're facing a weapons charge instead of something that's relatively simple. So it is important. And, our goal is to get rid of all the knife bans, because if there are no knife bans, then you don't have to worry about what you're carrying. Knife bans, we have knife bans on the type of knife, daggers or stilettos or switchblades or automatic knives, as we call them today. We have length limits. Some cities have a 2.5-inch length limit. Some cities have a 3-inch length limit. Some cities have a 5-inch length limit. So there's all these complications. Our goal is to get rid of those. And we try to do that at the state level and then pass preemption. So once we fix the state and we pass preemption, then that covers everything. And to make it clear, preemption means that state law preempts local law, so that there can't be a local law more restrictive than state law. So if we fix it at the state level and we get preemption passed, then the entire state is covered. If we fix it at the state level, but we don't have preemption, then you can still have local laws that are more restrictive than state law. So that's one of the reasons we have the app, is because it's sometimes really hard to tell. And it's one thing, if you live in a particular city or state and you know what your local laws are, that's great. But if you start traveling, you can be caught unawares. So I think it's important that people realize that knife laws are complicated, and if you're going to travel with a knife, it's worth paying attention to see whether your knife is legal. And then you have the peculiar laws. In New York City, it is illegal to carry a knife openly. So if you have a knife clipped to your pocket, like a lot of us will carry our pocket knife clipped to our pocket, you're breaking a city ordinance. And yes, a cop is going to stop you on the street and you're going to get a violation. So you have those kinds of peculiarities. In Philadelphia, we won one of the very first lawsuits after the Bruin decision, because it was illegal to carry any knife in Philadelphia, whether it was a little Victorinox Swiss Army Classic or a Bowie knife, didn't matter. It was illegal to carry one. And that was a case where the city attorney rolled over and said, yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, we'll pay for your legal fees because this is unconstitutional. I mean, did not expect that sort of reaction out of a place like Philadelphia. But it's been gratifying to see the kind of changes that we have made in the majority of states that have very restrictive knife laws. I mean, we still have plenty of work to do. We're currently suing California, Minnesota over their switchblade bans. We're suing the federal government in a case you recently covered in the Fifth Circuit over the Federal Switchblade Act, which we believe to be unconstitutional. We've now reached the point where, in the difficult states, it's going to take going through the courts, which is annoying and time-consuming and expensive.
You've actually, it's interesting. Maybe you could give your strategy, because I think some gun groups could take something from your playbook. You have an interesting balance of legislative work versus litigative work. And so, what's your playbook there for, it seems like you are very good at working bipartisan kind of angles on the legislative side. You've had red and blue governors kind of go along with you. Like you said, you had probably a blue attorney in Philly and got that through. So what's the playbook there for figuring out when to go legislation, when to go for litigation, and how to work on both sides of the aisle?
So we have had, as you note, very good success in the legislature with bipartisan efforts. This was a whole lot easier a decade ago than it is today. And we have been successful because, first of all, it's not guns. Okay? So that helps. The second of all is we are able to, on the right, it's very easy. It's a Second Amendment issue. We get support from them. That's not hard. On the left, our primary argument is this is a criminal justice reform issue. Who is getting arrested for carrying a, quote, illegal knife, end quote? You know, it's not folks that look like you or I. It's people of color. And when we were suing the city of New York over their abuse of their gravity knife ban, 87% of the people arrested were people of color. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, and that was a case where we had support from the ACLU, from a lot of left-leaning advocacy organizations that you would never expect. Now, that wasn't a Second Amendment case, but it was a weapons issue. And it's gotten more difficult to get bipartisan support because things are so partisan these days. But, I mean, we have had Black urban Democrat sponsors of our bills, and we have gotten support from Black caucuses in states, in blue states, because, you know, they don't want to see their people arrested over what is basically just a ridiculous charge that typically gets added on. And, you know, every time you see a bad incident where someone ends up in trouble and there's injuries or death because of some sort of interaction with law enforcement over something that's not really an issue. You know, no one was using a knife to commit a crime. It just happened to be in their pocket. It helps us with that point, that this is really criminal justice reform, which is something that both sides of the aisle are interested in for different reasons.
Yeah, no, I remember in California, all my years in California, like the dirk and dagger thing was really abused. Like, you know, construction guys with like a screwdriver, well, that's a dirk, right? So if I need something to call you in on, it's going to be that screwdriver. You're coming home from work.
Yeah. I mean, and you run into situations where prosecutors just push. We ended up at the Supreme Court in California when Harris was AG, pushing a case against a young Hispanic man who she wanted to call a Swiss Army knife a dagger. And it was illegal. And it was absurd. And it went to the California Supreme Court. And in the end, they chose the most junior associate AG to argue the case because nobody really wanted the loss on their record. They knew they were going to lose. It was that bad a case. Yeah. It's like, okay, you can get some good experience. But, you know, that's frustrating because, one, you have a prosecutor going after someone for no good reason. In this case, as is often the case, a minority. And it costs so much to show up in court to argue a case that should never have been argued in the first place. But if we don't show up, nobody shows up.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. Just last comment on that kind of that track, just to tie it back to the gun rights side of the house. These nuisance laws that most of these knife laws are in the gun space. I think the biggest parallel is magazine bans, right? So in California, again, where I'm originally from for the past 30 years, the magazine ban is effectively ignored, and because there's enough, it's only possession's not illegal. Buy, sell, trade is. So possession of it should be fine, but yet because it's on the books, it just becomes this thing that, like you said, like any kind of issue that they want to raise, it's just this add-on. It's just this that can be abused for whatever reason. So it would be smart for the gun groups to kind of leverage that same mindset that you used for as far as nuisance and add-ons and disadvantaged communities, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, if
it would accept its guns.
Yeah, I mean, I understand magazines are a little bit more abstract than the guns, so it's like I know no one's going to go right down the middle for guns, but at least it's a little less threatening, waving a magazine around in court versus a Glock.
But we have seen, actually, I think what has gotten a lot of traction is just that laws need to be understandable to normal people, and when they aren't, they tend to sweep up a lot of people, right? So during the pistol brace era, when pistol braces were, potentially going to be considered stocks again, how many millions of people had an NFA violation sitting in their safe without even knowing it? And like, I remember when I lived in New York, one of the big things that you just kind of had to know, and most people didn't, is if you carry a pocket knife, like you said, Doug, it better not be visible sticking out of your pocket, because if you go into the subway, the police will stop you. They will take the knife and they'll hold it by the blade and try to flick the handle open, holding it by the blade. And if it flicks open, then they at the time, this is no longer the case thanks to your work, but at the time they would consider that a gravity knife that opens under gravity. And they arrested hundreds of people a year on that basis. And to your point, all those people were random construction workers coming home.
Yeah, 70,000 people over the course of a decade.
Wow.
Were prosecuted, and this is a perfect example of how bad it gets. If you had a prior, like a misdemeanor 30 years ago, it would be upgraded to a felony. People literally went to jail for carrying a pocket knife because they had a misdemeanor, as a teenager. Wow. It was crazy. We spent the better part of a decade fighting that. And at the same time we are fighting this in court, in the Second Circuit, we are also trying to get the law changed in the legislature, which we did. We did it 3 times. 2 times, Governor Cuomo vetoed the bills, even with strong bipartisan support. The last time we passed the law, a repeal, there was 1 nay vote in the entire New York legislature. And with our case up for conference at the Supreme Court, he finally signed the bill.
Wow.
Rather than take a loss. Because if they had accepted the case, of course, there's no guarantees, but if they had accepted the case, it was guaranteed win. And there was no way he was going to stand for that. But, that was a decade of fighting, of going, a highly partisan blue state supporting a change in the law, and the governor vetoed that twice before he finally signed it. It's insane.
So how can people, maybe let's try to generalize some lessons. If you are a gun rights advocacy group or a zoning reform, name your issue, whatever it is, and you're trying to tackle a partisan issue, I'm looking behind you. I don't see a staff of 500 lobbyists. What does an enterprising rights group have to learn from what you've been able to do?
Well, I think you start out with recognizing that it's not going to be easy, that you're going to beat your head against the wall a lot, and that you have to keep, you know, just because you lose today does not mean you're going to lose tomorrow. There are many states that it has taken 4, 5, 6 years of going to the legislature to get a law change. That just takes a certain amount of stubbornness and tenacity that, you know, a lot of people don't have the patience for. I mean, the entire knife rights organization is essentially myself, my wife, and a contract lobbyist that works all over the country at state level issues. That is the entirety of the organization. So it's proof that, you know, if you are focused and you can find good touchstones for the legislators, that you go where the legislators are, whether it's National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucuses or wherever you're going to go, where you're going to find bipartisan groups of legislators who at least have some passing interests. You know, you find hunting folks on both sides of the aisle. Well, what do hunters use? They all have pocket knives, or they all have hunting knives. You know, so you have a place to start for us. And I think if you're looking to change a law, repeal a law, get a law passed, it's, you know, what we have found is you got to figure out what's going to motivate the people. And it's, in our case, it's always different from one side of the aisle to the other. Always different.
Doug, are you, like you said, you're pretty much a small show here, one man, one woman, and a little extended show, which is incredible that you've done all this clearly through busting your butt and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifice on your side. It's incredible. Do you have access to legislators? I mean, what's the playbook there? Like, do you represent yourself as head of this organization? We want to talk to you about this issue, XYZ. You're talking to their staffers, you're calling them on the phone, you have multiple states involved. Like, that seems insurmountable.
Well, first of all, we're lucky in that we are a Second Amendment organization, so we will often be able to work through, whether it's the NRA, Second Amendment Foundation, whoever who have full-time folks in these legislatures. And we have worked with these organizations for years. And if something comes up, they will let Todd know. And one of the most important things that we've discovered is actually showing up at the legislature. You cannot get things done writing emails. You have to be there. You have to work the halls. You have to make friends with the staff. You have to, you know, and as I say, it's showing up where they go, whether it's Sportsman's Caucus, whether it's some gathering of outdoor folk. It's you want to talk to them when they're being receptive. But that isn't always the case. I mean, sometimes you go in cold and we get an introduction because somebody writes us a letter and says, I'd really like to get my law fixed in my state. We're like, well, who's your representative? And Todd will work with them to make an appointment with the legislature, and we show up.
Wow.
with that individual who's the constituent.
Wow.
And showing up is so important. It's all we can't flood the legislature with 10,000 emails. We don't have that capacity. But showing up, making friends, showing how this will benefit their constituents, how this will help them get reelected. I mean, that's what every legislature is interested in. He and she are interested in getting reelected. So we work at convincing them that this is good for that.
Now, to be clear,
And
you're physically going from state to state, you know, capital to capital, and like getting in the building and meeting with the staffer and
you
ultimately
know,
the legislator and et
uh,
cetera
uh,
on
uh,
48 continuous states.
yeah. Todd and I both, in a typical year, COVID exceptions, will do 100,000 miles a year
Wow.
on the airlines. Um, it is so important. Big organizations, they have regional people, and someone will have 3 or 4 states or 1 or 2 states if they're big states. We don't have that luxury, so we have to show up. But it's 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 building relations with
Right.
these legislators
Right.
and recognizing that, again, if it doesn't get done this year, you're going to come back and you're going to come back. It's also recognizing how important it is that incremental steps are an important part of the process. We don't always get everything we want the first time, and that's okay. If we get you have people, well, if we don't get everything we want, we will take what we can get, and then we'll come back next year and try to get more. And there are many states that we have worked in, Texas being a perfect example, where in Texas, every other year over a course of years, we have nibbled away at Texas, who used to have horrible knife laws. I mean, it was illegal to carry a Bowie knife in Texas, believe it or not. A Bowie knife in Texas. Okay, illegal to carry.
It's un-Texan. Yeah.
As Governor Abbott said during the signing ceremony for that bill, Texas isn't nearly as Texas as some people think Texas is.
I've always said that. Yeah.
And it is so true. But that's a case where just plugging away, taking a little bite at the apple, getting more and more done over the course of a decade and a half, and we still have one little bit to do. But and there's an example of, so when we were working in Texas to get rid of their length limit, they had a 5.5-inch length limit. Literally, so we've got a Democrat sponsor, a Republican sponsor. The bill is moving nicely through the legislature, and then literally blocks from the Capitol, a young man on campus is stabbed to death with a 6.5-inch hunting knife. Okay, so the Republicans are like, we're out of here. And the Democrats are like, well, hell no. It was the Democrats who saved that bill.
Huh.
Now we ended up with some weirdness that we're still trying to fix. But the point is, it's so easy to run away from these things when something bad happens. And we have seen many a bill die because of a headline. But you just got to keep coming back, and you got to start looking at the people that can benefit from this. It's not always the people that you think they are. And I think being stubborn and persistent is one of our biggest strengths. I mean, it's annoying, it is frustrating, it is, but when you get a win, it makes it all worthwhile.
That's amazing. Kareem, I feel like such a loser. You and I go to like 3 events a year, and we whine about it the entire time.
Yeah, we are not racking up 100,000 miles.
You got Doug here like putting us in the wall.
I'm not sure it's good for either your health or anything else, but it showing up is so important. It is the one thing that separates us. And in a lot of cases, when I look at people trying to get stuff accomplished, it's showing up that makes a difference. And again and again and again, and building the relationships, and not just with the legislators, but with the staffers and the chiefs in the various offices. And, you know, for a lot of legislators, this is such a little tiny issue. But if you can get, as we have done, and get staff interested and they see the benefits, and, you know, they will push it through with their legislator. It's always a question of just discovering where you have an entry, and then working that, and not giving up.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about, so you mentioned starting the organization in 2006 and people telling you you're crazy for doing this and it's never going to work. And the thing is, like, they were kind of right. Like, you were crazy to do that. It was
absolutely.
It was,
still am.
It was like, you know, we talk at OSD in the newsletter that about this kind of dark age of gun rights, starting with the National Firearms Act in 1934, going 70 years to the expiration of the federal assault weapons ban in 2004. And you started Knife Rights right after that, at kind of the tail end of that, before Heller, and gun rights had been in the freezer for 70 years. And then knife rights weren't even in the freezer. They weren't even a concept on people's radar that this might be a thing.
No.
And so what made you think this could work?
So, going back to the inspiration for Knife Rights, you know, it all started with an article in the Wall Street Journal. Headline, B section. It was about these evil tactical knives. And it was written just about as badly as every bad article that you've ever read about evil assault weapons. And it was terrible. It was terrible. And I realized that there was a organization that existed that was primarily organized by the manufacturers that had occasionally stepped up in an effort to prevent some bad knife legislation from passing, but had never. There was no NRA, Second Amendment Foundation. There was nobody proactively working to get rid of knife bans. I had spent time in England. I had seen the reaction of people in England to, oh my God, you have a pocket knife. And I realized that if this attitude towards so-called tactical knives got legs, we were going to end up like England. And that would be bad. Yeah. And when the manufacturers organization took 3 weeks to issue a response to this article, I realized there was no NRA for knife owners. There was nobody, and there needed to be. And I foolishly, with absolutely no experience whatsoever in doing this, said, oh, gee, I'll start an organization and, you know, we'll have 10,000 members in a couple of years. And, you know, well, didn't quite work out that way. But I made some very good contacts early on. And Obama did us the favor of trying to essentially redefine the definition of a switchblade under the Federal Switchblade Act. U.S. Customs was going to treat basically any knife you could open quickly, like a one-hand opening knife or an assisted opening knife, as a switchblade.
And this is for the purposes of kind of manufacturing knives abroad, importing them to sell in the U.S.
But you know, if they had established that as a definition, then that would spread.
Sure.
And so this was early on. The manufacturers organization, us representing grassroots, the NRA, the NSSF, everybody worked together. And looking back on it, it is I realized what a miracle it was that we were able to pull off and get a fifth exemption to the Federal Switchblade Act passed. I mean, we weren't going to get rid of the Federal Switchblade Act, but we were able to protect one-hand opening knives that weren't switchblades, that weren't automatic knives or gravity knives. And that really gave us the credibility to then the next year repeal the first switchblade ban, which was in New Hampshire, and pass the first knife law preemption law in my home state of Arizona. And then we were on a roll. Mm-hmm. But it all started with this terrible Wall Street Journal ad. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been approached by a Wall Street Journal freelancer wanting to write about knife rights. And as soon as I explain where we, what the impetus for founding knife rights is, all of a sudden their interest in writing an article goes away. It's pretty hilarious.
They created a monster, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe actually you mentioned the Federal Switchblade Act. This is a kind of obscure federal law that most people have never heard of, but actually has a very big impact in this space. Just walk us through what the law says.
So the federal what's known as the Federal Switchblade Act was passed in 1958, which is where a good deal of, in that time frame, we saw a good deal of the bans on switchblades that were passed in 23 of the 50 states. And it controls the transfer of automatic knives, gravity knives, and butterfly knives based on the definition. Interstate, which means between the states, and also coming into the United States. So it's illegal to import, and it's technically illegal to trade amongst the states. Now, there are exceptions for the military, and that exception has been stretched rather widely because anyone who's familiar understands that you can go online and you can buy automatic knives across state lines, and there will always be a little check mark or something that says basically that this is being transferred in accordance with the Federal Switchblade Act, and you're going to obey the Federal Switchblade Act. And there's a lot of winking going on with this, and in our case to repeal or find the Federal Switchblade Act unconstitutional, one of the arguments that the feds made was, well, we don't enforce it very often, and we haven't prosecuted it for ages. And of course, we were able to find examples where they literally, blow someone's door down and go arrest them for switchblades. So it is occasionally prosecuted. It is this sort of Damocles that hangs over switchblade manufacturers. It's there at the First Circuit. The lawyer actually said, no, we think we can go, prosecute these people who are doing this. Like, well, thank you, because we were worried about standing, and you've just given us standing. The entire Federal Switchblade Act grew out of a fake news story in a ladies' magazine about the toy that kills. And it was literally a made-up story about how you could walk into a Five and Dime and kids could buy a switchblade and they would go out and kill people. It had no basis in reality, any more than a lot of the fake news that we read today. But it grew legs, became a cause célèbre amongst some politicians, and the next thing you know, we have this ban that has existed ever since. I mean, interestingly enough, the argument then was, oh, well, not only are kids doing this, but all these Puerto Rican gangs, West Side Story, and all these, wait, those are people of color.
Sure.
Where did all our knife bans come from? They came after the Civil War, when, okay, blacks can't have guns. We're going to also, now they're carrying big knives, so we're going to outlaw big knives and Bowie knives. And they came in the 50s. All these knife bans have racist origins. It's amazing when you think about it. Which is something, something else when we talk to folks on the left. It's like, guys, where do these laws come from? Like, oh, that's bad. Sure. But nobody knows this until you point it out.
Yeah, the parallels to the NFA in 34 are right there as well. They were the immigrants who, especially those Italians, who like, they didn't want to have those guns. And it's just this constructed moral panic that gives us these terrible, terrible laws that somehow stick. So is that progressing to do you see an end to this federal ban at some point, or modify it to basically neuter it, or what's the prognosis there?
I thought we had a good oral argument at the Fifth Circuit. As our attorney said, I'd rather be us than them, referring to the DOJ. We are hopeful that it will be found to be unconstitutional. It will go away.
Is this because of Bruin?
Yeah. I mean, until Bruin came along, trying to do anything as a Second Amendment lawsuit was difficult.
Right.
Bruin opened the door. As I said, it wasn't long after Bruin that we filed our first lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia, and then these other lawsuits followed. That gave us the wherewithal to say, hey, there is no historical tradition of banning knives. It just doesn't exist. And there's no question that knives are arms, even though we have, a court like in the Ninth Circuit who wants to go, well, yeah, but switchblades aren't commonly used for self-defense. Well, there's nothing in Bruin that says for self-defense. We're fighting the same sorts of issues, but knives instead of guns that the Second Amendment community is fighting in guns. People are making up the law that doesn't exist, and we see that in our case against California, in our case against Minnesota. We thought we had a very good hearing in Minnesota. Cautiously optimistic we're going to get a good ruling there, which will go to appeal because, Ellison isn't going to roll over and say, yeah, you won. That's one of the most frustrating things. We're a very small organization. Fighting these legal battles is very expensive. And you just the process is, where you're starting, where you're going. We know we're going to lose in the Ninth Circuit. It's like, doesn't that upset you? No, because I need a circuit split.
Yeah.
Okay? And if we win in Minnesota and we lose in the Ninth, okay, we got the Eighth and Ninth. Now we have a case the Supreme Court has to take. There really is a strategy here, but it is so annoying and expensive to accomplish it over a period of years. Takes a lot of patience.
Absolutely. And again, to be clear, this This will go after the switchblade part, but it also includes probably butterfly knives, gravity knives, whatever
Yes.
kind of tech.
Butterfly knives, gravity knives are all covered by the federal definition of
Right.
what a switchblade is. Different states have different definitions. Butterfly knives are perfectly legal in New York State, but switchblades aren't.
Right. So
because
that's
of the way they define things.
Right. And it's interesting to not be all kind of depressed about the legislative stuff here and the laws. There's a lot of cool tech in, the knife I'm a big knife enthusiast. I have probably 60, 70, 100 pocket knives, EDCs of all stuff. And I even got into some of the real custom guys who were like using really cool materials to build basically works of art that you can carry and use a little bit. A little nervous to use $1,000 knife too much, but
Chuck, let me rat Chuck out. I have seen his knife collection, and I've asked him about like some of the nicer ones, and I said, "Oh, how do they cut?" And he said, "Are you crazy? You don't cut anything with these. You just look at them."
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, Blade Show, which is the largest knife show on earth, is coming up next month in Atlanta. We'll have a booth there, and probably as good a time to mention is, I mean, our annual fundraiser, the Ultimate Steel, was just launched. We have all kinds of steel things, knives, firearms. We get a lot of support from the firearms manufacturers who are supporting a Second Amendment organization.
Nice.
So there's an opportunity to win some really cool knives, some really cool firearms. It is, if I do say so myself, one of the best fundraisers out there. I invite people to stop by kniferights.org or theultimatesteel.org and check it out. We could certainly use your help, and some of these prizes will bring a big grin to your head. And I mean, we have multi-$1,000 knives in there.
Yeah, it's not hard. I'm actually shocked. I go to some of the custom, auction places or the secondhand ones, and you can get knives pushing, into 10 grand and beyond.
Yes.
So it's definitely.
But we also have using knives. We have EDCs. We have a little bit of everything. But it's one of the interesting things that has occurred over the course of the years that we've been doing this is, an awful lot of firearms owners carry a knife. But there are a lot of people who carry knives who are not only not firearms owners, but would never consider the Second Amendment to be important to them. And we meet a lot of these people at knife shows. Whether it's Blade Show or some of the other knife shows that we go to and have a table at or a booth. And it's really introducing the Second Amendment to people who've never really considered it important to them. And it's been one of those little side lights that has been very gratifying, is to pull folks who aren't firearms people, who aren't gun people, into the Second Amendment community with the realization, hey, this matters to me too.
Yeah, it's a really good on-ramp to kind of thinking about that, because to be clear, I mean, I've carried a knife since, to give you my origin story for knives. I was a kid, probably 10, 12 years old, visiting relatives in the Bronx, and I had a Boy Scout pocket knife. And we had driven down to see a relative in an old station wagon, and we left our cat in the car for the little visit we were doing. We got back in, my dad sat on the seat, and those springs under the seat caught the cat's collar and started to choke it. So our beloved Squeaky the cat was choking under the thing because the leather thing was there. My dad couldn't undo it. Anyone have a knife? I'm like, oh my gosh. And I whipped out my Cub Scout knife, and he went in and cut the thing and saved the cat. And the cat had passed out at that point. So it was like nick of time kind of thing. So like that sealed the fate of like, I will never not carry a knife. And I have virtually every day, probably to my own risk, anywhere I've been, even across Europe and wherever it is, I figure out a way. To the point of shipping stuff to my in-laws to have when I arrive, right? Every visit I do to any relative's house has, I don't usually check a bag, has a knife stowed somewhere that I can go and visit and pull that Bacher, that Kershaw, that whatever, right?
For a lot of us, getting dressed, it the knife goes in the pocket.
Yeah, you're naked without it, but it's a utility thing more than I will never defend myself with a knife, most likely. I mean, the way, of all people, it's a tricky thing. And, I don't want to be in that close contact with anybody.
I don't either. That's
so
why I carry
the knife
is
not exactly. That's not what it's there for, but it is invaluable as a daily tool. I cannot think of a single day I don't use it for something, right?
Look, knives are tools that we use every day at home, recreation, work, but they are occasionally used as a weapon, as an arm, in self-defense. And it happens a lot more than you would think. I've Googled searches that turn up stuff every day where knives are used in self-defense. Not as often as firearms, certainly. But, there are still many places in this country where you cannot legally or easily carry a firearm, but you can carry a knife. And if the choice is nothing or a knife, I'll take the knife. Exactly. Is that my first choice? No. That's why I carry a firearm.
Right.
But push comes to shove, I explain this to people all the time. The Second Amendment does not say firearms. It says arms. And that includes knives and sticks and, clubs, and not just firearms.
Yep,
absolutely. I don't know if we want to do this, Kareem, but are we going to do an EDC check right now? See what everybody's got.
I'm going to fail.
Benchmade Osborne, very classic.
Nice.
Well, that has my name on it, so
beautiful.
It might be a hint that I'm also a knife designer.
Oh, nice. I got to get some of those to add to the collection. That's awesome.
There you go. But look, we're all in this fight together, and when we win on the knife side of things, it's a win for all of the Second Amendment community, which is why we get support from the 2A advocacy organizations. It's why they file amicus briefs in our court cases. It's why we get help in the legislature from them. It's because, we're all in this fight together.
What do you think this looks like in 50 years? What's the dream, and what could happen, best case scenario here?
So I think if things go as they seem to be proceeding, that eventually, I don't know what's going to happen to knife rights after I go away. I'm getting a little bit long in the tooth, but certainly it is my hope by the time that I retire that the Federal Switchblade Act has gone away, that the vast majority of knife bans at the state level have been repealed. Preemption gets harder and harder to get done, but I still expect to continue to get preemption laws passed. It's going to get better. Will we ever get rid of every knife ban? I don't think anyone. I'm not going to run out of work anytime soon. But the vast majority of them, we have taken so many of those off the books already, and I don't see any reason why that's not going to continue, absent some unexpected change in the political landscape. These bans don't make any sense. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to continue to get rid of them.
I think that's amazing. I hope you can get some mentorship going to help spread the load and help.
I have to find somebody crazy enough,
I think they're out
as
there.
crazy as I am. I think
Maybe they're listening.
Maybe they're listening, but
Yeah.
I think you have a good. My day job, I deal sometimes with the UK, and if you need anything to snap people into action, like you're Chicken Little. What's happening in the UK specifically with knives and just self-defense in general and everything on that front is unbelievable. And it's not that you need to make it up or go to
no.
hyperbole. It's like, go and look. I can give you mountains of evidence of where this could go easily in a very much a first world democracy. And so you have an excellent case that doesn't need to be used as a scare tactic. It's an actual case study. So I hope we lean into that because that should help.
Knives are demonized in the UK.
Big time, yeah.
I can remember standing on the stern of a boat with half a dozen life rafts off the stern. All the lines are mixed up. It's the only sensible way to get this straightened out is to cut the lines and move the life rafts around. We were testing life rafts. And I pulled out a one-hand opening pocket knife and opened it up, and I swear everyone on the boat jumped. And this was 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Okay? It's their attitude towards knives is crazy. They have bins where people can, toss their knives because God forbid you might use it to stab someone. It's insane.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a real world example of how bad it could go. And that was part of the impetus for me starting Knife Rights. I did not want to see our country end up like the UK. I grew up on a ranch. I had a knife when I was 6 years old, a little pocket knife that was given by my grandfather. It's a tool, folks, but it's also an art. And, it's hard to protect tools, but we have a constitution to protect our arms.
Absolutely. On the England point, I learned that you used to work at Aston Martin. What did you do there?
So I was, originally I started as a mechanic in the U.S. subsidiary, and then became parts and purchasing manager in the U.S. for the subsidiary.
That's super cool.
Yeah, one of my previous lives, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we find just talking to people who've done cool stuff in the space is they usually have interesting backgrounds. So the pattern is confirmed. Well, anything else we want to cover? I think, just to reiterate to our audience, kniferights.org, ultimatesteel.org. That's steel like the metal, STEEL.org. And that's the fundraiser, which is happening right now. So check that out. But what else do you want to leave people with, Doug?
That's really it. We are very successful. We are very small. We will give you a very good return on your investment in our Knife Rights organization. And I don't think you can ask any more of an advocacy organization than to actually go out and get stuff done. And we do that. We get it done. And this is an opportunity for you to support us and get a chance to potentially win some really, really cool prizes. And that allows us to continue to forge a sharper future for all Americans.
All right. Love it. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Doug.
Fantastic, Doug. Thank you so much for what you do. I know the sacrifice you put into it, and I can't tell our listeners enough. Like, this is one of the organizations you can very clearly support and know you're doing like direct one-to-one good work with your money, with your capital. So please consider it.
I appreciate the compliment. It means a lot coming from you guys.